At Broad Peak Base Camp, 4 climbers have finally completed their descent. Not the descent they imagined, not that they walked their own descent beneath their own strength, not returning to celebration photographs or stories of another summit. Nirmal, Nims Dai Purja, Wang Zhong of China, Nima Sherpa, and Kili, Pemba Sherpa, known throughout the mountain community as Kilu. And after days of searching, dangerous ground operations, and weather that repeatedly grounded the helicopters, approximately between 3:53 p.m. Indian Standard Time and 4:27 p.m. Indian Standard Time, we found out around 3:42 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Their bodies have finally been brought down from the avalanche terrain to the base camp. The Alpine Club of Pakistan says this brings the number recovered from the disaster to 7. When weather permits, the bodies are expected to be airlifted to the military hospital in Skardu. From there will come the identification, official documentation, coordination between governments and embassies, and eventually the journey to their loved ones. Many are experiencing a profound sense of grief. Nims Dai Purja and the world-renowned climbers connected to this tragedy have touched countless lives, and their loss has left a hole in our hearts. In one way or another, many people have been inspired by their courage, determination, and extraordinary achievements. Their stories may have even helped some of us rediscover our own strengths and reinvent ourselves. For some, peace may come through talking, listening, and learning more about what happened. Understanding their stories may help us begin to lay our grief to rest, not by forgetting, but by accepting the truth, honoring their lives, and finding the strength to move forward amid life's many unknowns. There is one certainty that unites us all. Every life eventually completes its cycle through death. It is an inseparable part of being alive, regardless of who we are and what pursuits we undertake. What remains is the impact of a person made, the lives they touched, and the inspiration they leave behind. May their stories continue to give others courage, purpose, and hope, and may those who grieve find peace in remembering how they fully lived.
Well, certainly there isn't any happiness in this update. Recovery does not reverse death, and it does not remove the suffering of the families. But it gives them something, that becomes extraordinarily important after a person disappears in the mountains. The certainty. It allows the families to know where their loved one is, and it allows funeral and, religious rites to take place, and it allows the person to be returned to the community from which they come or where they belong.
The most important part.
Yeah.
Explorers Web has reported that drones flying above the accident area showed motionless figures scattered across the snow. One drone team reported seeing 7 bodies. Separate aerial footage provided to the publication appeared to show 5 figures. Those images were important to the rescuers. They had helped establish where people had been carried and where a ground team needed to search. We can explain what the drones discovered without showing identifiable bodies. The existence of that footage actually tells us something remarkable. A generation ago, a mountain could hide someone for decades. Today, GPS trackers, drones, satellite communication, and helicopters can sometimes locate the lost within hours or days. But technology could not save the 10 people swept away on Broad Peak, unfortunately. But it may prevent the mountain from keeping every answer.
There were 10 climbers.
They died, in the avalanche.
Yeah. And
on July 30th.
And they say the 7 have been recovered, am I right?
Yes, that is correct.
Well,
so the latest official count says 7, have been recovered.
Yeah, Nims, Wang, Nima, and Kilu were brought to the Broad Peak Base Camp on August 5th. That is today. And it was about 3:42 a.m. PST when we found out.
Yeah, and they went through an exceptionally difficult, demanding, technically difficult terrain. And this recovery operation included Mingma Gael Sherpa, known as Mingma Ji. And also there were some Pakistani climbers, Sirbaz Khan, Abid Bagh, Sherbaz Karim, and some Nepali climbers, one of them being Dipan Gurung and Pemba Chewang Sherpa. So Mingma Ji jumped on the helicopter as soon as the news came out, and he knew he would join up in one way or another with this rescue team being assembled. He is a world-renowned Nepali mountaineer, an IFMGA certified mountain guide, and the founder and managing director of Imagine Nepal Trek Expedition, which he established in 2016. He was also one of the 10 Nepali climbers who completed the historic first winter ascent of K2 in January 2021, along with Nims Dai. So they entered that terrain that had already produced another avalanche during the recovery effort.
Finding a body was only the beginning. The avalanche had swept climbers far away from the standard route.
Yes.
Some were left on steep and exposed terrain where a helicopter could not simply land. Rescuers had to, they had to reach them on foot, secure them, and physically move them through an area where the snow could still release again.
So it was still dangerous.
The rescuers were at risk too.
Absolutely. And a helicopter longline operation had been discussed. And in that type of recovery, a rescuer or load suspended beneath a helicopter because the aircraft can't land, that just shows you how difficult the terrain is. But the longline operations at this altitude are actually extraordinarily demanding, and they're not routinely performed by Pakistani military pilots in the same way that specialist helicopter crews sometimes perform them in Nepal. So that left ground rescuers carrying much of the responsibility and much of the risk.
And this raises one of the most difficult questions in the entire story. Not only this, all the other rescue operations, that how much danger should a living person accept to recover someone who has already died? I'm sorry for saying this, but that's the reality of it. Every family wants its loved one brought home.
Absolutely.
That desire is completely understandable, but if another avalanche takes a rescuer, the operation creates another grieving family.
Again and again.
Yep.
It's like an ongoing circle.
Yeah.
And the latest Explorer's Web account identifies 3 people as remaining on the mountain for now. Pakistani climber Sohail Saki still missing. Here is his last video on Broad Peak. So he's explaining how wonderful of a time they're actually having. So he looks absolutely ecstatic. And American mountaineer Mallory Geese and Nepali climber Nawang Tindu Sherpa. Earlier reporting said partial remains belonging to Mallory Geese had been found. That helps explain why some early reports used found, recovered, and located inconsistently. As of this recording, the full recovery of those 3 cases remains incomplete.
Does the name, unfortunately, Mallory, remind you of someone?
Absolutely.
And I bet
it does.
Most probably he was named after the Mallory of Everest.
Yeah, she.
Oh, she?
Yes, Mallory.
Oh, yeah.
In this case,
she.
She, yes.
Yeah, Mallory is a unisex name. Those words, found, located, and recovered, do not mean the same thing. They are very different words. A tracker may locate a probable position. A drone may show a person. A ground team may physically reach that person.
Yeah.
The body may then be moved to Camp 1, Base Camp, Skardu, and eventually home. For the families, each one is a separate stage,
Separate form of stress.
Yeah.
The Alpine Club has said that efforts to locate and recover the remaining 3 will continue when conditions permit. So as we speak, the conditions keep changing. But no family should be promised a recovery that would require another person to enter the terrain considered unsurvivable and dangerous. However, they are experts and it's their livelihood and business. So they take whatever comes with being a guide, and rescue comes along with it. That is a terrible balance now facing the mountain community.
Well, before we focus on names only, we must say all 10 names as a tribute, because fame should not determine the value of a life.
Absolutely. So we had Nirmal Purja,
Yep.
Pur Bahadur Gurung, known as Yukta, Nima Sherpa, Kili Pemba Sherpa, known as Kilu, Noang Tindu Sherpa, Gayalu Sherpa, Sohail Saki, Mallory Geese, Wang Zhong, and Nadira L. Hardy.
Nadira also seems to be female.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, 6 came from Nepal, seems like it. Sohail Saki was from Pakistan, certainly. Mallory, you said, from US. Wang from China. Nadira from Oman. So I thought Nadira... Well, before there was an Omani climber, and I thought he was from Oman, but Nadira is from Oman, is a female. Well, there were guides, clients, record seekers,
Absolutely.
experienced high-altitude professionals, and people attempting deeply personal goals.
Yes, it's important to note they were high-altitude professionals.
Yeah, they had different passports and were associated with different expedition operations. They were not one single operation, but when the avalanche released, it did not distinguish between nationalities, companies, professionals, or clients.
Nope, not at all. And Nims was the most recognizable name, but this was not only Nims Dai's disaster. It was a disaster involving 10 human beings and 10 circles of families, friends, and communities. Our condolences go to every one of them.
I remember when he first came to the limelight, when he started in the beginning. I remember that.
We all remember that.
Yeah. So where exactly were they?
They were actually on beautiful Broad Peak. And, if we need to mention this, the peaks, just as dangerous and disastrous as they are, they're absolutely gorgeous and they're beautiful. It rises to roughly 8,050 meters in the Karakoram range. It is the 12th highest mountain on Earth and stands close to K2 on the Pakistan-China frontier. Its summit extends along a long ridge, which gave the mountain its English name. Expeditions approaching from the west generally pass through Skardu, continue toward Skole, and then travel along the Baltoro Glacier toward Concordia, one of the most extraordinary concentrations of high mountains anywhere on the planet. And Broad Peak is approximately 8 kilometers from the infamous K2.
Not sure you know this or not, or people, probably most of you may know this. The K stands for Karakoram Range, and K1, 2, 3, 4 are those mountains. They go, I think, up to 11. I'm not sure.
Wow.
Yeah, and
11 of those. It's just shows the range. And
some of them are local names like Nanga Parbat and all, but most of these are named after K1 and K2, like English names, just for the convenience. Like Everest is Sagarmatha. No,
so who administers that area?
The area had been Gilgit-Baltistan. It's poorly administered, I would say, and I would not be shy from saying this because recently around that area there has been some uprising against the current quote-unquote administrators of Pakistan. From the Indian government position, the Gilgit Pakistan forms part of the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. I can give a
long dated
2-day lecture on
history
this,
of
why
that.
and how, and it was actually illegally occupied, and India position at the time of 1940s.
Yeah.
They just give up to United Nations, quote unquote, the peacekeepers. You know how it is.
Yeah,
and I think Nims also
the atrocities of the partition.
Yeah, Nims also, he released a video on peace. I think
We'll get to that. We'll get to that shortly.
So Pakistan administers it, while neutral international reporting community described it as Pakistan administered Gilgit-Baltistan within the wider disputed Kashmir region. So it's Kashmir disputed, but there are other internal reasons why India never attacked and got it back. So
that's politics.
Yeah.
We'll leave that to another video. If we'd like to talk on that, let us know. Comment below. So this political history does matter, but it's not the moment to turn the 10 deaths into a political contest. Politics seems to even follow people to the highest peaks of the world, something mountaineers stay far away from. Nims Dai recently made the political statement, which really resonated with me. I appreciate this a great deal. Take a look at this.
I have a very humble request to all the world leaders Guys, we really need to stop. Oh, you said children,
Yes.
men and women are dying. So I know you guys can make it. At the end of the day, I really believe that peace is the way. So, guys, from Holy
I do too.
Spiritual Mountain, this is a very humble request. And I truly believe that if all of us remember each day that one day we're gonna have to go, then I think that would put everything pretty straightforward and pretty simple, and all this evenness will go. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Nims. I'll
Yeah.
forever remember that. The mountains definitely have a way of bringing clarity. They can humble us, broaden our perspective, and sometimes even lead us toward a deeper sense of enlightenment. Perhaps leaders who believe war is the only solution should stand among the world's highest peaks where human ambition feels small and the value of life becomes unmistakably clear. And from that height, they may see conflict and humanity from an entirely different perspective. The mountain existed before modern borders, and the people who died came from many different countries. Our own connection to these mountains is personal and in a different way. I was not born in the Himalayan foothills. I yearn to go there.
Oh, we went there last year, I remember, but you didn't go as far as more to the west
Right.
of
yeah.
it.
But it's important to note that my co-host was actually born
Yeah,
there.
I was born in the lower Himalayan Shivalik foothills, west of the Nanda Devi and Karwal mountains. And most people that are from the mountaineering community, they know that area really well, the Karwal. As a child, going toward the hills felt like entering another world. We used to go back and forth. The roads began to curve. The air became cooler. The plains slowly disappeared behind us. Clouds, we loved disappearing in the clouds.
Oh, yes.
Clouds that had, seemed distant began moving inside the roads. At that age, I did not understand avalanche layers, cornices,
We don't
wind
know
loading,
anything about
or
that.
high altitude weather. The only thing I understood was that the mountain felt enormous and permanent.
And vast.
Yeah.
But I did come to the mountains later. For many years, we began traveling into them together. The mountains became a part of our shared life. We hiked together, we made mistakes together, we turned around together. We were caught by the deteriorating weather together. And on one occasion, we came down after a fall with badly injured hands and knees. And even for me, my tailbone, which I still feel more than a year later.
Well, but those hikes certainly were not anywhere close to the technical scale of the Broad Peak or altitude, but we do not compare ourselves with the climbers traveling above 6,000 or 8,000 meters.
Yeah, that's something
but
else.
Some of the internal questions remain recognizable and same. The summit is close, summit fever. We have already came so far. The weather may improve, may take a chance. We can continue for just a few more minutes and maybe it will clear,
Yeah, you're waiting for that moment. Just one more, just wait a little bit longer. But the mountain experience begins actually by teaching you to go upward, I find. And eventually, after some time, it teaches you something more important, and that's when to descend.
Yeah.
So one question people have asked is whether July 30th was simply too late to be climbing Broad Peak. Was autumn approaching? Had the normal season ended? Was this year's evident global warming issues causing an unprecedented change in the Himalayan mountains? Should Broad Peak have been closed? The date alone does not support that argument, but the principal climbing season on Karakoram's 8,000 meter peaks generally runs through the summer, broadly from June into August. Broad Peak summit activity commonly occurs in July, and K2's narrow summit windows frequently appear in late July or early August. And July 30th was late in the expedition cycle, but it was not automatically outside the recognized summer season.
No, July, August is the time, the peak window for K2 and Broad Peak. They're close to each other and share much of the same approach and support system that makes climbing and acclimatizing on more than one Karakoram peak during the same expedition logistically possible, but possible does not mean safe under every set of conditions,
Oh, yeah. And we should be precise about this particular expedition. Nims was not necessarily completing a broad peak K2 combination at that moment. He had summited Gasherbrum 2 without supplemental oxygen already on July 21st. He then described Broad Peak as a late addition to his plans. He may have felt a time constraint and wanted to get this done ASAP. I mean, instead of having to come back at another time, limiting unnecessary travel. A successful ascent would have moved him closer to another record. That's important to note. That was to repeat all the 14 8,000 meter peaks, the ascent, without bottled oxygen, both up and down.
It happens all the time. Like we were discussing last week, that there's this mountain, we can do another one with it, add another one with it, forgetting the time limit.
Right.
The real question is therefore not, was July 30th outside the climbing season? It was not. The better question is, had the mountain become temporarily unsafe inside an otherwise normal season? You know what I mean? For weather reasons, yeah.
Yes, a permit will tell you that you are legally allowed to attempt the mountain, but the calendar tells you that expeditions generally operate at that time of year. Neither one tells you that the snow between Camp 2 and Camp 3 is stable on that particular morning. That is based on weather data, but personal evaluation of the weather in the past few days and the ongoing current weather, they had to turn back on a summit attempt on G2 due to unstable snow conditions. And the snow was up to the chest. It was soft and loose, and one wrong move could trigger an avalanche. They even had to be careful on the turnaround, making sure to trek only the exact footpath created, not even a few centimeters off the trail. And this was so important because it could trigger an avalanche. So the teams had reached on Broad Peak. They had reached Camp 2 on July 29th and were climbing toward Camp 3 on July 30th, which is when the avalanche struck. The whole way on the route from Camp 2 onwards is avalanche terrain. Between Camp 2 to Camp 3, steep snowfields, gullies, and loaded slopes. This is serious avalanche. This is serious avalanche terrain and was where the July 30th slide reportedly occurred. Above Camp 3 towards the col, there's extensive snow and ice slopes, and they remain exposed to wind slabs and to fresh snow avalanches, and it creates cornices, and there could be a possible cornice failure there. Near the col and upper ridge, this is also avalanche danger, but it may sometimes decrease where the ridge is wind scoured, but other hazards actually increase, including cornices, hard ice, rockfall, extreme exposure, and also exhaustion.
Yeah, so if there were, seracs, cornices, I wonder if they were between 2 and 3 camp.
Yeah, they were between Camp 2 and Camp 3.
Traveling. That's probably, the snow covered a lot of the hazard around there.
Oh, yeah, you can't actually, it's not going to be visible. You have to use your judgment in that.
Yeah, the crevices.
So the question is, if there's a lot of judgment involved, why wasn't the mountain closed completely?
Right. The high altitude mountains do not usually operate like ski resorts with controlled gates, marked avalanche closures, and patrols inspecting every slope. But as a ranger, if I was there may be one. I would have maybe said it has snowed and it's temporary closure for a day or two.
Yeah, because different teams will receive different forecasts. So this requires them to make independent decisions. And also you have to accept significant objective risk in that too. But when several commercial teams are traveling through the same gully, perhaps the decisions should no longer be entirely independent in that sense. That may become one of the central lessons of Broad Peak, not a permanent ban on climbing, not a claim that July was the wrong month, but perhaps a system that allows a temporary pause after a major snowfall. It could be a longer pause because there are pauses in place, but again, it's subjective. It's up to the individual leaders, particularly when several teams are entering the same terrain trap. Perhaps the authorities of the country's mountaineering association should be monitoring more and make that final decision, not the actual expedition leaders of specific private companies. And to understand why this accident has produced so many questions, we need to go back almost 2 weeks. On the night of July 18th, a major windstorm struck Broad Peak, and an American climber who is an emergency room nurse, Ian Overton, he later described large amounts of blowing snow. He said the terrain between camps 2 and 3 had significant snow and wind crossed, and it felt punchy beneath the climbers. So below camp 2, he described snow as unconsolidated and rapidly melting. Yeah, with loose rock and feeling ice.
Well, we would think that happens on mountains all the time, but that description matters. He was not simply saying the weather looked bad. He was identifying several interacting hazards.
Absolutely.
Wind transported snow, an inconsistent surface, unconsolidated snow, rapid melting is the point.
Rapid melting, yes.
Rockfall and unstable ice.
Unstable. So Overton was climbing with Hungarian mountaineer David Klein. The two had known one another for years and had survived a difficult winter attempt on Nanga Parbat in 2012 to 2013 between there. And during that earlier expedition, they experienced an avalanche. There was frostbite involved within the team and also high altitude cerebral edema. So Overton later said that experience itself left him unsure whether he would ever attempt another expedition.
So by mid-July on Broad Peak, before this whole havoc, the condition had initially appeared comparatively manageable, I think.
Yes.
Klein had said that avalanche danger seemed low because much of what was capable of sliding had already released.
Which could affect, if he had mentioned that would affect their decision as well.
Yeah, so on July 19th, he followed the Pakistani rope-fixing team during a 19-hour no-oxygen summit attempt. So it was an attempt, not summit. He eventually turned around approximately 50 to 70 vertical meters below the summit.
So close.
Now, Overton had already descended because altitude was affecting him.
Yeah, so he was the one who had gotten the cerebral edema. So then that heavy snowfall began around July 22nd, and Klein considered another attempt, but decided that a clear forecast immediately after a storm was not enough for him. So he explained that after a major snowfall, the new snow needs time to do one of two things: bond with the mountain or slide from it. And on July 25th, Klein and Overton packed their equipment and left Broad Peak. There was also a Pakistani climber who went down with them, and he actually had summited with Nims Dai on the previous expedition on G2. And they decided that they didn't want to take that life risk.
So Overton said that they continued monitoring the forecasts after Klein's summit attempt of that day. The wind remained too high in their monitoring. Humidity across the region suggested that the fresh snowfall was likely to continue through July 29th.
Oh, that's not enough time.
Nope, they decided their expedition was over.
So this is where we actually must avoid transforming concern into an accusation. We have found no verified evidence that Ian Overton or David Klein personally approached Nims Dai and told him not to climb. We have no verified evidence that Nims received a direct warning from either man and deliberately ignored it. What is established is narrower. Two experienced climbers examined the changing conditions and left on July 25th. Several teams with summit ambitions remained. They had their hopes up.
Right, so that means unless they come and give a statement that they did say or talk to him, so that difference in decisions deserves examination. That there were two different decisions. One decided to go, one decided to just, abruptly stop the expedition. But in hindsight, we can make every earlier observation appear like an obvious prophecy. But that's not how it goes on the mountains. The people remaining at base camp may have been receiving a different forecast. Well, it happens all the time with the mountains. And they may have believed that snow had enough time to settle. And they may have observed different conditions on the route. Or they may have accepted a level of risk that Klein and Overton were unwilling to accept. A lot of times I've seen people doing that.
Yes, that is true.
We do not yet have the communications required to know, or we don't know if there was cameras or anything else found.
I think if Nims had taken the risk, examined it, and used that, like if he just used that as a method always to determine whether he's going to summit or not, if the risk is too high, I don't think he would be able to accomplish his world records.
Yeah.
And before beginning the Broad Peak attempt, Nims posted, "Broad Peak, I ask for nothing but a safe passage up and back down." And in the fuller social media wording reported by other outlets, he added that he took 0 mountains for granted.
Well, those words are painful now, Not because they prove arrogance. In some ways, they show the opposite. They show a climber publicly acknowledging that experience, strength, and records do not guarantee safe passage at all.
But records do create their own pressure.
Yep.
Broad Peak was a late addition. A successful ascent would have left another major historical goal almost complete. We cannot claim that record pressure caused the decision to climb, but it is fair to ask whether proximity to an extraordinary achievement can change the way even an experienced climber interprets uncertainty. But my mom said something very profound about this. Even she had a comment on this tragedy. ਜਦੋਂ ਮੌਤ ਬੁਲਾਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਕੋਈ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ. It means when death decides to call you, it will guide you exactly to where you need to be for that to happen. It pulls you. But she also added that if death wasn't calling you, you would survive no matter how far you fell down. So on the morning of Thursday, July 30th, the climbers began moving from Camp 2 towards Camp 3, and death was calling. Their plan, according to reporting from Imagine Nepal, was to reach Camp 3 that day. They were supposed to briefly rest and then continue towards the summit on Friday. So when the avalanche struck, they were not necessarily on their final summit push. They were moving between camps through the main west-facing route.
So at 5:33 in the morning, Nim's Garmin tracker placed him at approximately 6,166 meters, it says, around the elevation of Camp 2. So that's when they started, I believe. At 7:03 a.m., that's about 1 hour and 30 minutes, the tracker placed the team at approximately 6,430 meters. Their progress appeared very steady.
Yes, and just before 9 a.m., both Nim's tracker and the tracker carried by Nadira El Hardy transmitted from around 6,660 meters. Further, yes. And published reports differ slightly over the precise final minute, so we should not pretend that one exact time stamp has been conclusively established without the complete original Garmin export, which we're all anxiously awaiting for. But the next pattern is unmistakable.
Within approximately 30 minutes, Nim's device appeared more than 2,000 vertical feet lower.
Yes.
That was a sudden change. And the Dira's tracker showed an even greater displacement. So she went further, more than a vertical mile down the mountain.
She was placed at pretty much at the base of the mountain.
So both trackers displayed a similar signature: steady ascent, sudden catastrophic descent, then a smaller final displacement toward the north.
Yes.
Okay.
There was a final movement. So the violence contained in that graph is difficult to comprehend. There's a line that climbs gradually across the screen. Then in one interval, it collapses. And the tracker continued transmitting, and several minutes or several signals appeared to show slight movement. And that too was uphill. So that is what created hope, because a tracker is moving, it's falling down in an avalanche, but all of a sudden it moved back uphill. And then Mingma David Sherpa sent messages saying that Nim's location was moving and that an urgent rescue was needed right away.
The tracker recorded a speed of 0.
Yeah, it's important to know.
Yeah, in steep terrain, beneath snow, or beside high cliffs, satellite reception can become unreliable. A stationary tracker may appear to wander from one calculated position to another. It happens, but usually it comes back to the same position. It doesn't just get displaced. The device was transmitting. But that did not prove that the person carrying it was moving.
We all thought it and hoped that it was. And that is the cruel contradiction of modern technology. A moving dot may be a survivor. It also may be a tracker sliding with snow. It may be continued movement within the avalanche debris, or it may be a GPS drift. A satellite tracker is evidence. It's not a heartbeat. So the tracker data creates another question, perhaps the most serious unresolved question in the entire incident. Was the alarm, when it was raised, when was the alarm raised? I really want to look into this question under a microscope. Explorers Web reported that an avalanche signature appeared at approximately 9:20 in the morning. The trackers showed multiple climbers suddenly descending hundreds of meters. Yet Naila Kiani of the Alpine Club of Pakistan told Explorers Web, "We only found out at 10 p.m. If those times are accurate, almost 13 hours passed between the apparent avalanche and the Alpine Club learning of the emergency."
We need to be responsible with this. This is a reporter timeline. It is not yet the conclusion of an independent incident investigation. We do not know who was monitoring each tracker, which base camp staff had access to the data, what radio contact was first attempted, whoever attempted it, when expedition companies understood that 10 people were involved, or exactly when military and government rescue authorities were contacted.
Right. So I think a lot of weaknesses will be exposed, but maybe strengths too. And we also cannot claim that the helicopter arriving earlier would have saved anyone. The tracker displacement indicates an avalanche of extraordinary violence. The outcome may already have been unsurvivable, but that does not make the communication question irrelevant.
But the detailed emergency system still requires investigation, even when the accident itself may not have been survivable. If multiple trackers show climbers suddenly dropping hundreds of meters, should that automatically trigger an alarm? Should one person or more at the base camp monitor every registered tracker? Should all expedition companies share one emergency channel? And who has the responsibility to act when teams from several companies are climbing together?
Those are great questions that need to be posed. And also, we will all learn very quickly from everything that comes out of this. We did learn very quickly that the avalanche did not distinguish between 4 expedition operations.
No.
So the emergency response could not afford to remain divided between them. Yeah. So what caused the avalanche? At the moment, we do not know. Heavy snowfall had affected Broad Peak. We know the climbers were swept down the west-facing route, but no publicly released forensic avalanche investigation has established the exact release. We can speculate, though, and that we can speculate, that the traverse itself triggered it.
Right. One possibility after heavy snowfall is a storm slab. A storm slab forms, when a cohesive layer of new snow breaks either within the snowstorm itself or at the boundary between the new snow and the older surface. So it forms a snow slab. These slabs can remain unstable for hours or even days after a storm, particularly in the large terrain, features and gullies.
Another possibility is a wind slab. Mm-hmm. Wind removes snow from one area and deposit it more deeply on another one,
Yeah.
often beneath ridges or across the gullies. So the resulting slab may appear smooth and firm while sitting over a weaker layer.
Yeah.
It could be blowing snow, cracking, and collapsing. And these are recognized warnings, but the distribution can vary dramatically across a mountain. This is why mountaineering is quite dangerous, to say the least.
Oh, then there are cornices. A cornice is an overhanging structure of wind-deposited snow. From the ridge, it may look like part of the mountain, even though much of it extends over empty space. But if a large cornice collapses, its weight can trigger a slab or on the slope beneath it. So I've seen
Yeah, a serac
incidents.
is different though.
Yeah,
It
serac is different.
Yeah.
It's a stack of snow on the route. Cornice is pretty much on the top of. It could be a false peak or it could be a true peak.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It kind of makes you think there's a peak there, and you can go further over. So the serac, it's kind of a tower or a block of unstable glacier ice. Seracs may collapse within little warning, and that's what K2 is infamously known for.
Yeah.
They can strike people directly or release enough ice and snow to trigger an even larger avalanche.
But we must repeat this. There is no confirmed public evidence that a cornice or serac caused this accident. There is no confirmed conclusion that the climbers themselves triggered the avalanche. A
Yeah.
storm slab, wind loading, cornice failure, ice fall, or natural release are possibilities, not established facts. So
The terrain itself may have amplified the consequences. So a gully can act like a funnel. Snow that begins across a broad slope becomes concentrated as it descends. The same moving mass grows deeper and more destructive inside the confined channel. And I mean, that will probably return us to the same central question. Was this an essentially unpredictable objective hazard?
or it had the recent wind and snowfall created a period of elevated danger that should have produced a collective pause. Until weather data, photographs, or forecast records and expedition communications are released, nobody should pretend to know the answer with certainty.
Yes, and people who have not spent much time in mountains sometimes imagine turning around as a failure. But there is a moment when that physical question, can we continue, must be replaced by another question, should we continue? We experienced that at the spooky Gargoyles Peak.
I know, we completed most of the route. We were very close to the summit, and we were approximately 20 meters from the
about
point
20
we
meters.
wanted to reach. And I think as soon as the question arises, should we continue? I think we should not. 20 meters sound like nothing when you are, sitting safely at home.
Right.
But the snow cloud was beginning to move in. The visibility was constantly changing. I remember that day. The environment that had allowed us to climb was beginning to disappear. And I tell you this, if it did not turn around, there was big snow that night. That was beginning of October, I believe.
Yes, yeah. And actually the mind starts negotiating as well. We have already come this far, isn't it? I mean, it's not that difficult of a peak to climb. It's only another few meters. Perhaps the cloud will pass. Perhaps we can reach it quickly and immediately turn around. Even in zero visibility, surely we can see at least one step ahead. But that second step ahead might just be a cliff. And that will be one step too close to an unstable edge.
But that ridge was very thin, I remember. It was just like a saddle. And we could not see anything. And the mountain,
Zero visibility.
Yeah, the mountain does not know how much effort you have made. The weather does not reward you because the summit is close.
I know. And
We
so
turned
we
around.
ended up turning around. And for a few minutes, it felt incomplete. It was such a long trek and climb. And the thought came that we might not ever be able to come back to redo it. There was no summit photograph, no sense of finishing what we actually had started. And that's the worst feeling for me personally. and we decided it was better for us to return safely. And after all those years, we have never regretted turning back from the gargoyles, not once.
Yeah, those 20 meters we did not climb became completely unimportant after, and the descent became the achievement. And we have passed by that mountain and went to the other one, but we haven't gone through that specifically ever since. It doesn't really matter because we can anytime because we are alive.
Absolutely. And there was another one, Diamond Peak, taught us the same lesson in a more frightening way. We were below the summit when we saw a snowstorm approaching, or it was probably more like a severe rainstorm now that we think about it, but it looked like the weather could change at any moment. And at first, the weather still appeared distant. There was still visibility around us. And so with that, the distant weather creates that temptation. Maybe there is enough time. Maybe it will move in another direction. Maybe we can finish it before it arrives.
But the mountain weather can remove that time very quickly. Thick clouds began erasing the landscape.
Yeah, it was getting harder and harder to see.
Yeah, the route that had appeared clear during the ascent became more difficult to recognize. Rock, snow, shadow, and open space began merging into the same color, I remember.
Yes, and we had belongings below the summit during that incident where we
lost them.
Yeah, we were coming back down and we lost them. That was frustrating because when you carry equipment into the mountains, every item has value. But possessions can't become the reason you remain exposed in deteriorating conditions. Objects can be replaced, but people cannot. So in that instance, we had to figure out if it was really, really important for us to find the stuff, or should we just leave as fast as possible? And in this case, we had to find our keys.
I remember during the descent, I fell in the whole finding the key incident. I rolled down the mountain at high speed. My knees and hands were severely hurt, and immediately the situation changed. It was no longer simply a descent before the storm. It was a descent in deteriorating visibility. While injured,
I know.
Can't climb back up to those little hills or long hills. Yeah.
An injured knee does definitely change the balance.
Yeah.
And injured hands make it harder to grip, protect yourself, or even stop another fall. And pain slows the movement, fear slows movement, and every minute lost means another minute inside the approaching weather. So we had to move quickly.
Oh, after a fall, your body remembers what happened. You still have to continue moving. But every step carries the fear of falling again, and I remember lagging behind the pace and hoping that I could make it.
So even though we lost the belongings, we recovered some, but he came down with the badly injured knees and the hands. But we survived. That day, we did reach that objective that we had imagined in the morning, but the descent objective changed. That is why going up Broad Peak that day was so dangerous, and why Ian Overton and David Klein decided to turn back before even attempting. That avalanche terrain has to be traversed 2 times, not once. That is why calling something a summit attempt can distort the reality of climbing. The summit is not the end of the journey. It's the highest point.
Yep.
You still have to descend. And our experience was at a much lower altitude and in far less serious terrain than Broad Peak. But the psychological argument is recognizable. We have come so far. Can we continue just a little longer? At some point, the strongest decision is to say no. But that requires a lot of guts. And perhaps in that moment, you need to recognize the value of your life. The Broad Peak tragedy has also shown how dramatically mountain search operations have changed. Searchers reportedly found Sohail Saki's backpack and a broken Garmin tracker. The drones examined the terrain that might have exposed additional rescuers. GPS signals narrowed the search area. Helicopters moved people and equipment when the weather allowed. But he has still not been recovered.
As of this recording, no official or credible report confirms that a camera, GoPro, phone, or a memory card carried by one of the climbers has been recovered with the footage of the accident. We hope they do. A distant avalanche video circulated after the disaster, but Explorers Web said it had not been confirmed that the footage showed the specific avalanche that struck the climbers. The confirmed visual material includes the post-incident drone footage used to assist the search.
Yeah, only a few generations ago, mountains could hide people for decades.
Yep.
George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irving disappeared on Everest in 1924. Mallory's body was found in 1999, and 75 years later, that was. So in 2024, a National Geographic team found a boot containing partial remains believed to belong to Irving, 100 years after he disappeared. The camera Irvine may have carried, which could possibly answer whether he and Mallory reached Everest summit, has never been recovered.
Well, there's a kind of story behind it. The Chinese took it and all that, but that's some other time.
Yes.
There's a Gunther Messner case.
Yes.
He disappeared during the 1970s descent of Nanga Parbat after climbing with his brother Reinhold. For decades, arguments continued about where and how Gunther had died. In 2005, approximately 35 years later, remains, clothing, and one of his boots were identified on the Daimir side.
And I believe the second boot was discovered now too.
Well, the location supported Reinhold Messner's account of the descent. That what he had been saying for that many decades was true.
And that's why he attests to the immense grief that everyone is feeling to have left someone behind on the mountain.
Yeah.
And the loss of someone so dear and so close and the pain associated with that. But there's also a sense of comfort because that person passed doing what they truly, truly loved doing. Yep. And glaciers do indeed preserve the people. They move them, they carry evidence for kilometers. But sometimes they return what they have taken only after the parents, siblings, and friends who are waiting they've grown old or they've died themselves. And that's very sad. On Broad Peak, GPS and drones reduced that terrible uncertainty from generations to days. Technology did not change the outcome, but it allowed several families to know where their loved ones were, at least. And we must use that technology carefully. A tracker is not a heartbeat, and a drone image is not entertainment. And a camera, should one ever be found, would be evidence belonging first to an investigation and to the families, not simply content for the internet.
Yeah.
When we heard about Broad Peak, it brought back memories of mountain tragedies from the 1990s, particularly Kanchenjunga. In 1995, Russian climber Yekaterina Ivanova died when an avalanche struck her bivouac at approximately 6,700 meters. And a Bulgarian mountaineer, Yordanka Dimitrova, later disappeared at around 8,300 meters during a summit attempt.
I remember that incident. I was in high school.
Oh, wow.
But that tragedy did not cause India to close Kanchenjunga for decades. The restriction on climbing from the Sikkim side are connected primarily to the mountain's sacred rules.
Yes.
If most people, mountaineering community knows this. During the first ascent in 1955, Joe and George, they stopped approximately 5 feet below the actual highest point to honor a promise that the sacred summit itself would not be stepped upon. It's people's rule there.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's spiritual.
Yeah.
And Nanda Devi has a different history. Its sanctuary was closed to ordinary mountaineering access in 1983, primarily because of environmental damage and the extraordinary fragility of the region. So later access has remained limited and highly controlled. These examples show that governments can restrict mountains, but the reasons vary, be it sacred tradition, environmental protection, national security, or immediate danger. A permanent ban on Broad Peak is not the obvious answer. Mountaineering involves accepted danger, and closing every dangerous mountain would effectively end mountaineering. But temporary condition-based restrictions deserve serious discussion after a major snowfall. Could all teams be required to attend one shared hazard briefing? Could there be a 48-hour mandatory stand down, or I would say even longer? Could tracker monitoring be centralized? Could a sudden catastrophic altitude loss trigger an automatic emergency protocol? Could expedition companies be required to share weather observations rather than treating them as private information?
No, the mountain may not need to be closed permanently, but there should be a mechanism for saying, not today, not until the snow has settled, those things.
Yeah, and at the time we're actually recording this, 7 climbers have been recovered. 4 of the latest have reached Broad Peak Base Camp. And whether the weather permits, they are expected to be transported to the military hospital in Skardu. After the official procedures, identification, and coordination, their final journey will continue toward their families. So for 3 families, the recovery remains incomplete, unfortunately. The mountain is still holding part of this story.
Yeah, for those families, this may provide a form of closure that are found. But closure is not the same as peace. It does not mean grief has ended. It means uncertainty has been replaced by reality. And reality may be even more painful.
We are grateful for the Pakistani and Nepali climbers who entered unstable terrain, for the pilots waiting for openings in the weather, and for the people who studied the tracker data, and for the drones that crossed slopes that were too dangerous for another person to enter immediately. But gratitude cannot become silence. Why did experienced climbers interpret the same snowfall differently? What information did the remaining teams possess? Was there a shared discussion of the snow conditions? And who monitored the satellite trackers? Also, why was the Alpine Club reportedly informed so many hours after the tracker data showed a catastrophic fall? Could movement above Camp 2 have been temporarily suspended? And what will change before another group enters the same gully? Nims Dai and 9 other climbers began that morning moving upward. They carried plans, records, responsibilities, friendships, and families with them. They came down carried by people who refused to leave them alone on the mountain. The summit is optional, but coming home is the responsibility. And when climbers can no longer come home themselves, sometimes other people accept that responsibility for them. For Nims Dai, Wang Zhong, Nima Sherpa, and Kilu Sherpa, this was their final descent from Broad Peak. For their loved ones, it is the beginning of goodbye. For the mountaineering community, it must be the beginning of an honest investigation. May all 10 climbers rest in peace. And may every family eventually receive the answers and the closure they deserve. Thanks for tuning in to Reembok Arcane. I'm Rima. I will leave you with a question to comment below. Should major snowfall trigger a temporary halt to every expedition on an 8,000 meter mountain? Comment below, and we'll see you on the next one.